In this lesson, we're going to be adding the shadow through color correction. Okay, so I went in between lessons and edited my rotoscope just a little bit more, so it would dip down a little bit further into what we're seeing for our zombie's back, because my shadow is going to cast over in this direction. So you may find once you add this that you need to go in and edit your rotoscope as well. So the way that we're going to be adding this in, this shadow paths we have right here, is with a color correct node. So hover over the empty area of your node graph, hit the tab key, and we'll type in color correct. And you want to go ahead and drop that onto the pipe underneath your read node for the clean plate. Then you want to grab your mask port for that color correct and drop it onto your shadow. Now, to get this to work, it says it's a non-existent channel because obviously, even though it is an alpha, it does not have an alpha channel. So what we need to do is go into our ranges, and instead of the default of masking with the RGBA alpha channel, we need to change it to the RGBA red channel. And so now we have this basically merged in through this color correct, but we need to go into the color correct tab to start changing the way that this looks. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to change the offset. So right now the offset is at black, and we need to sample from this blue color. Now, for you to be able to really see what's happening, I'm going to turn the gain down just a bit so you can see kind of where this is and what it looks like. Okay, so you can see there's the shadow. There's the alpha, and then the shadow is here on the ground. So another issue that you'll notice is that we've moved the placement of these guts, and so the alpha for this one, since it hasn't been moved, isn't in quite the right place. So we're going to need to transform that in a minute too. But to start with just getting the color correction part of it right, we'll come over here to the color picker and just go ahead and click that. And then come over here to the shadow that actually is real in our footage, and you want to control click to sample that blue. Then, while still holding control, hold down shift and you can draw a little bit bigger box to get a better sample. Then we can start to play with the gain a little bit more to start to edit that color. So it's really up to you how far down you want to turn it. You don't want to turn it all the way down because you see how dark that makes this part of it. We can actually use a second color correct node to really start to edit this a little bit further. Okay, so let's come in here and play around with the offset a little bit, because I think we could edit these colors to actually have a little bit more accuracy for us. So if we come in up here, we could turn up the saturation a little bit, and we could also kind of start messing with some of these other colors once we can tell how much more blue or green this shadow needs to go. So just turning up the saturation, you can see that makes it a little bit more blue, and then you can play around with where this gain falls. Okay, so you can see that even just messing with these two options isn't quite enough, so maybe we could play around with our contrast a little bit. So turning that contrast up is going to give you a little bit more of the white values, but it's still really hard to tell how much it's affecting it. So let's go ahead and add our second color correct node. So I'll hit tab and hit enter to drop in a color correct node, since that's the last thing we typed, and I'll just place that there. And then this one, let's just turn our gain all the way up to 4. So it's really, really going to be dark. And then we can go into the first color correct we added and really start to tweak this. So maybe not have the gain quite as dark in this case. So right in here is a good place to have that, you can see. And then we could probably edit our contrast a little bit heavier. Just going up a few points there. See how that makes it a little bit darker. And then let's also see if we can't get this color to match a little bit better. So I found some values earlier that worked really nicely for me. If I just put that at a 0.012 for the red, That helps to get it a little bit closer to that green. And then the green we can edit to be a 0.25. And these values are a little bit closer. That was actually the blue that I added. We'll just put a 5 there. And then the blue we would put at 0.045. So you see that's a little bit closer, but it's still slightly, just a little bit too light. So we can go into our gamma and really start to see how that affects it. And that can make us get a little bit of a darker color, which is going to match it a lot more closely. So right about there, I mean, that's almost indistinguishable. If we are at 1% of zoom, I mean, that's really, really, really close. And if you never knew that there was any difference, that is a pretty good line to walk. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that this shadow is a little more diffused on the edge than this one, so we can add a blur node to help that. So just click up here in the empty area of your node graph, hit the tab key and type in blur, and we'll just drop a blur in right here on that color correct tab. Now we need to turn this up a little bit, so we can just start to turn it up until you get a pretty similar amount of blur on that edge. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I mean, when you're zoomed out about right here, you can't even distinguish that edge at all. Now yours might not look quite like this if your rotoscope is up a little bit more high. So you're going to want to go into this RotoPaint node and probably edit this a little bit and just try to get it a little bit closer to this edge here. Now it looks like this point, I might be getting a slightly strange result here. So one thing I can do is just come in and kind of angle this down a little bit better right there. And since that's so jagged, that's fine. You're never going to be able to pair that up with something else over here. And also later on, we'll be adding a blood stain here on the ground. So that's going to help this part of the shadow to look a little bit better as well. So now we need to grab our transform nodes and add those in as well so that this is in the right place. So a really easy way to do that is just to use the transform nodes we already made for the transformation of these. So the way that we can do that is by cloning them. So just with both of them selected, just shift select those, hit the Alt key and then hit K. And that's going to give you two clones. And you can see they're tethered by this little brown line. And what that's going to do is it's going to say any changes we make on either one of these transforms will be updated in the other set of nodes. So they are linked together in a way that allows us to not have to worry about changing this one and then changing the other one. It's a lot better than just making two more transform nodes. Okay, and then we can drop that on to the pipe before the blur or after the blur. It really wouldn't make a big difference. And now that is moved down in a better place. But you're going to notice that this is still giving us a little bit of trouble because of the blur node that we added. So there's a couple of ways that you could approach this. You could use a dilate node where you would come in here and actually be able to cut out this area here, but it would actually affect the entire shadow if you added it just to this part between this read node and the transform. So what you might want to do is actually use this alpha to cut out the alpha for this part, so we're only getting the shadow over here. Now that will mess with the shadow that you get here on the ground, but since we're adding that blood stain, it's not going to matter if there's a shadow right underneath this part. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we need to do is use a merge to merge these two together. So we'll go ahead and hit the M key to bring that in. And we'll just put the A on this piece and the B on this one. And then we want our transform node to actually hook into the merge now instead. So we can just bring that over like that. And then what you want to do is come into the operation of that merge. So we've got over as the default. Now, to be able to see this a little bit better, let's just take a look at the merge itself. So select it and hit the 1 key. And what we're trying to do here, I'm going to clear this out, is to make it look like this area is black. We only want to see this shadow. So what you can use a few different of these, but I found that from and exclusion both work pretty well, but exclusion leaves this little red line around it, so I would definitely say from is a little bit better choice. And because we have those transformed, that is really going to look great for you. So now let's go back over here to our final merge and hit the 1 key again, and you can see that now we don't have that weird kind of haloing around this part. So once we get the blood stain added in, that is going to make a huge difference. Now if you wanted to use that dilate node that I was talking about, you could do that, and it would help to maybe bring a little bit of that back. So to show you how to do that, I'm just going to hit the tab key and type in erode, which is going to give you a dilate node, and you can choose the fast one. That will work for you, so you can drop that on, and notice that if I start to increase this or decrease it, it brings that back a little bit, but it's just, it kind of is all or nothing sort of thing. So it almost just brings back the problem that you were trying to solve. So it really depends on if you want that or not. Another thing you could do is, instead of having a dilate, you could rotoscope this so that you have the dilate and it has this here at the bottom, and then just rotoscope that part out at the top. So that would work for you also. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the way that this looks as it is, because again, once that blood stain is added, you are not going to notice that there's not a ground shadow right underneath this part, because the whole time it's going to be in that blood. So it's kind of just one of those things to take into consideration before you spend a whole lot of time trying to create a rotoscope and, you know, masking that and all of the things that go along with it. Let's just try to see if once we do all of those secondary effects that we're going to add, if it's even necessary to have that ground shadow. So with all that in mind, stick around, and in the next lesson we'll begin adding that blood onto the ground.